Well, welcome to our third Twilight session on wildlife gardening. So, what is wildlife gardening? Well, it is encouraging wildlife to, get into your gardens. Residential gardens make up just about 5% of the land use in England. And it's a great way of attracting wildlife to your door, getting to know more about our native wildlife, increasing your knowledge, but also, encouraging and supporting biodiversity and biodiversity growth. Some of the techniques that are kind of typically used in gardens aren't that encouraging. You can end up with some kind of like green desert style environments with short, tightly mown grass. So a lot of the things that we encourage are perhaps going against that kind of formal gardening. The main things are kind of introducing food, water, and shelter. So that's building ponds, planting wildflowers, and putting in places for wildlife to live.
I mean, there's loads of different things you can do that Matt's just gone through, really, and it's sort of, you can either go like absolutely massive with it and do your whole garden, or you can do sort of any combo of the above. And those are just a couple of things that you can do. So ponds, yeah, once again, it's water, shelter, and food, and all of those represent various different demonstrations of that.
So, does size matter? No. So we've seen this quite a lot through the lockdown and the pandemic as well, where a lot of people who were struggling to find, struggling to get access to outside space because of the places they lived, perhaps in high rises or in flats with limited outside space. They did the best to make, little havens for wildlife and balconies, courtyards, alleyways. Certain things you wouldn't be able to do. So you're not going to be able to put a big pond in somewhere, but you can add water, like a micro pond. You could have a container, you could have a bird bath, things like that. And there's always things you can do. So, for example, we spoke there about apartments, but also if you're really, really struggling for space, there's friends or groups you can join. There's allotments, there's local green spaces you can get involved in as well. Then this was someone he's been on Gardeners World quite a bit, and he was actually there's a conference recently that I went to where Jason Williams was talking, and he's a Manchester-based gardener, lives in an apartment. At the start of the pandemic, he had very little greenery, but during that he got, I suppose, obsessed in quite a healthy way, I think, with greening up his outdoor space, and he's made a bit of a career of it now. He's actually got an online business, and I think one of the things he does is he kind of sells ponds that would fit into those kind of locations, like small little ponds, but quite, an inspirational character.
Yeah, so one thing you can do is dead material. So dead materials such as, compost, standing wood, sort of leaf litter, all that kind of stuff. You're providing food and shelter within that. So compost and organic matter is obviously food for anything down to microorganisms, as well as all your kind of digesting invertebrates and then fungi as well, sometimes slow worms if you're lucky and you're in the right place. But not necessarily food, but they live there. And it's a great sort of starting point for a lot of gardens, even things like leaving leaves on your lawn or having a compost heap or somewhere where you put your dead material is great for those different things. Don't know what that is.
But we've got one of those, so that's a hot bin. So that's just a good way of breaking down things really quite quickly. Yeah.
I know how inconsistent my compost is. at certain times of year it's steaming hot, absolutely full of worms, and then it's other periods of the year it'll taper off. And there's the problem with the inconsistency in weather and then the inconsistency in biodegrading. So that thing's consistent all the time.
So have you got one of those as well?
No, I've just got
No, yeah, I bought my wife one of those for like a 35th birthday. So it's just a big block of polystyrene nearly, but it can get up to about 40 degrees in good temperatures, and it's
How fast is it making compost?
it's a lot faster. Yeah, you know, within a couple of months you've got good quality compost.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily as helpful because actually I do like those things about keeping nutrients out of the grass. But it's a good, you know, if you've got a lot of dead material that you're breaking down, there's good ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two different, right, we've got two different types of wood. Dead wood, you've got standing dead wood, and then just like sort of dead wood on the ground. Standing dead wood is really important. There's certain assemblage of invertebrates that use standing dead wood. So you've got stag beetles, which will do their whole life cycle in one tree. So your females will stand at the top and mate at the top of the dead tree, and then climb down to the bottom and lay their eggs in the base of that. So what you've got with standing dead wood is you've got the material above ground, which is decomposing, and then the material underground as well. So it's a food source for two different sort of assemblages of invertebrates. And there's a lot of other beetles that do the same kind of thing when they lay their eggs in the root base and then climb to the top. And yeah, standing deadwood's great. It's also habitat for bats, birds, you know, loads of stuff uses that. Lesser spotted woodpeckers are apparently quite a big fan of standing deadwood. And then there's other dead woods, so that's a dead hedge there where you can make kind of barriers, and it's quite a good way of sort of providing habitat for hibernating invertebrates and all sorts of stuff, as well as kind of providing barriers where you need to provide barriers. You know, if you're doing clearance anyway, making a dead hedge is a very easy way to keep people out of certain areas and block people certain areas off at the same time as providing rotting wood, which is food and habitat as well.
We've made some willow fence from coppiced willow, and honestly it's definitely still alive.
Oh yeah.
That's the kill.
Most trees will just die, but willow, the moment you put it
Yeah.
back in the ground.
I mean, it's flowery, it's being pollinated.
Okay, so next bit is trees. We're basically just working our way along. You should say trees and plants, I suppose, really, but we're just working our way along the food web there. So we've gone from dead material, providing nutrients. We then have the trees capturing sunlight energy and the carbon dioxide and making the living organic material, which is again used for food. So what have we got there? Yeah, trees, hedges, shrubs, all providing, you know, value and organic matter. And on the next slide, we kind of talk a little bit about which species we should be using. But rowan, apple, birch, hawthorn, willow, they're all really good for small gardens. And like it says there, planting native is good, and you should do as much as you can really of native stuff. It's not to say that if it's non-native, it's, well, what we're trying to say. I'll let Joe take over this. Yeah. Yeah, Joe's better at this stuff than that. Yeah.
You know, native versus non-native, it's difficult to completely plant native because even when you do buy native plants, you get cultivars, and especially in ornamental gardens, a lot of the native stuff isn't as showy and flowery as the non-native and the kind of specifically grown stuff. And you know, there's a lot of non-natives that are really good. You know, lavender isn't native, but it's great for pollinators. Yeah, English lavender is native to the Mediterranean, as I learned today when I was looking at alternatives for budding.
Lavender replies.
Yeah.
I found that out in France when I did a field course as well.
So, you know, there's a lot of non-natives that are great for pollinators. However, your natives are going to often host sort of there's a lot of invertebrates that are
specifically.
associated with certain species. So hawthorn's got over 200 species associated with it. So things like, you know, Buddleia is great for pollinators in general, so it attracts loads of butterflies and it's a great food source, but it's also can be really invasive. It can be really destructive in certain areas. So it's sort of, if you can plant native, that's the best, because it still provides food for everything, it's still providing shelter, and also you've got the kind of very specific associated animals that will use that plant specifically, rather than just attracting the kind of generalists that will eat and drink anything.
Do we have many moth species that are specifically co-evolved with certain plants?
Yes, so moths and butterflies are particularly deeply associated with certain plants. A lot of inverts will kind of only have, like, you know, specific food plants. Yeah, and it's the same, you know, there's fungi that's associated with very particular things, like there's, you know, there's loads of different things. But then equally, you know, you've got the red squirrels up in Formby that actually it's the Norway spruce that they like, because it's more difficult for the grey squirrels to survive off that because it's less energy rich. So actually, if you plant more broadleaf stuff, you often get greys moving into an area. So it's a balance, you know. It's not helpful being really strict about a lot of this stuff, because you end up putting people off rather than, you know, encouraging people to get involved.
I think it's just keeping away from the invasives.
Yeah, so it's keeping an eye on the invasives. So you can find a list of invasives. It's Schedule 9 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. But it's things like rhododendron, snowberry, what else? Japanese lily, obviously, like.
Yeah, we've got the constant battle against those.
Yeah.
But then that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. A lot of them you can't get them out unless you're going back every 2 minutes and pulling them up in Himalayan balsam and all sorts of stuff. So the less you can plan. And you know, all it takes is one new cultivar to come in and someone to plant it, and then it's the next invasive species, you know.
Okay, so next feature is water. Typically ponds, but you know, it doesn't have to be a pond. You could buy one, preformed plastic shell, dig your own. But features that ponds should have are things like a shallow shore to allow animals to get out if they do end up kind of falling in. Let it fill up naturally with rainwater, so it kind of regulates its own pH. And like it says there again, you know, plant native plants, or just wait to see what colonizes it. But avoid invasive. So it's you know, it's the same with aquatic plants as what we've just been saying about plants in general. Things to avoid there, things like crassula, Canadian pondweed. What's the one that's totally banned now as well that they used to use in schools?
There's loads, like parrotfern's bad.
I can't remember the one.
There's quite
Pennywort.
Feathery.
Yeah,
Floating pennywort. It's a really bad problem now. So.
Sometimes we have very well-intentioned members of the public who are like taking bits and pieces from their own ponds and putting it in the wildlife ponds, and it's like.
Yeah, it's a really bad issue in the New Forest where people like clear out a pond and just like dump all of their pond, you know, all their pond plants, which means that crassula's just like invaded so many areas.
Yeah, and the other point to make there is, you know, don't import things like frog spawn from other ponds into your ponds. If it's viable for amphibians, they'll find it and they will use it, you know. Okay, and then moving on to food.
Yeah, so I mean, food wise, it's mostly flowers. You've obviously got grass and all sorts of stuff, fruits and everything as well, but it's mostly pollinators. If you are gonna plant a wildflower meadow, get native mix. There's a lot of garden centre ones that will say, you know, wildflower mix, and it will be all sorts of stuff.
Like Europe.
And just, well, I mean, I don't think they'd even put up much attention in it. It's just stuff that gives a nice show and looks pretty. Ideally get a local mix. Some areas will sell local mixes, some areas won't. But at least get a native mix. So there's quite a few places. So Endersgate do a good selection. Naturescape. I think that you can quite easily search, UK native wildflower mix, and it will give you loads of places that.
What would you say are the toughest species? If you say want to put them into a school and you need them to be hardy, to be tough, to resist certain amount of mechanical damage, which are your best species to go for?
Unfortunately, it's going to be stuff like thistles and teasels and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely, because a lot of the rest of the stuff is quite kind of ephemeral. Like daisies are quite good because obviously they're quite small. Stuff like borage is good because it's big and bushy and sort of quite sturdy. Well, the umbellifers are pretty sturdy, so wild carrot, wild parsnip, but be careful because some of those are poisonous and you get like hogweed and stuff. But that kind of thing. What else? Yeah, it's difficult because the moment you get too pretty, people are like, oh, that stuff's actually good stuff. Foxglove's quite good because it gets quite big quite quickly. But that's going to poisonous, so be keep an eye on sunflowers. And then so the other thing is fruits and berries. So all your kind of hedge plants there. So hawthorn, blackthorn, buckthorn, and then trees. So rowan, hazel. Most thing, oak, like there's loads of stuff that produces fruits. And then actual fruit trees, so cherry, bird cherry, crab apple, are nasty enough that the kids won't eat them, but not, too unpleasant. And there are some good non-natives, so Pyrocanthia, privet, and Budley are all very good for pollinators, but obviously if you can get native species, those are going to be better. So there's really good guides online. So the Bumblebee Conservation Trust has got loads of pages on what to plant. As the Botfly Conservation has got a page for moths and for butterflies, so they've got 2 separate pages with loads of lists on them.
Or underrated moths.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone forgets about the moths and they're super important pollinators.
Yeah, and I think things like moths, they can be kind of attacked from multiple angles. So things like cinnabar moth, beautiful moth, but then everyone's pulling up the ragwort, and it's important food source. Yeah, so good for trampling. You'll never get rid of it. Yeah.
The other thing that I haven't put in, I should have done, if you are looking at planning wildflower meadows, best thing to do in terms of seeding is use green hay.
Okay.
So green hay is cuttings from a local meadow. So you do the autumn cut. Once everything's kind of flowered and gone over and you've got the seed heads, as you cut it, you cut and collect it, and then you spread that on where you want the seeds to grow. So you go in, kind of scrape it so you've got a bit of bare ground, and then scatter the green hay onto where you want more wildflowers to grow. So it's a good way of kind of transplanting definitely local native seed collections, and just a way of sort of bumping up other areas in terms of diversity is a good thing you can use if you can find a local meadow that has the capacity, or either you cut it and take it, or
make friends with the farmers. Yeah.
Well, if you've got any farmers with wildflower meadows, but
I think of you hear that with people like Josh Stiles locally. I think he was sowing it and then siding it himself.
Yeah.
And perhaps if you could get in touch with someone like that.
Yeah, National Wildflower Centre, so Scouse Firehouse does work in schools and stuff, so he's got local seed.
Okay, so moving on to the third of our kind of holy trinity of good things for wildlife gardens. We've got shelter. So basically, like we've already mentioned, leaving it untidy. We have mentioned a few of these already. So we've got the dead hedges, we've got log piles, and we've got compost. Again, again, it's just leaving those spaces where animals won't be disturbed. Not the whole garden for most people. It will just be like a small area that they leave. And what have we got? Yeah, so we've got food for worms there, other species, hibernating insects, and things like hedgehogs as well. You know, I've got a corner I was saying to Joe earlier, in my kitchen window, there's a corner, and it just had some hibernating ladybirds. And they've woken up this week. So
They're everywhere, aren't they?
yeah, I suppose it's a similar thing again. It's just leaving them. You know, the temptation might be to try and move them, put them somewhere better, but they're quite happy doing whatever they're doing there.
On the back of the curtains, because the
Right.
back layer is the thermal layer, and they get into the pleats and they just sleep there all winter.
Yeah.
But suddenly, you're right, they're suddenly all over the
Yeah.
windows.
Yeah, and compost heaps as well. So we've got things like bumblebees hibernating there. Loads and loads of different species, grass stems, dead plants, under rocks. Yeah, it's just a question of leaving those places to let those animals find shelter there or hibernate there if it's over winter.
Yeah, and I think the point is that it doesn't have to be, it's not about abandoning your entire garden and moving the whole thing. It's if you can spare a tiny corner, even that's really useful and really helpful. And there's different stuff you can do in quite a small space that will be really helpful for loads of different things.
So in terms of shelter, this kind of ties in with, I was going to add a section on kind of gadgets really, because quite often that's the fourth aspect. Anyone who's interested in wildlife, they're like, well, what else can I add? You know, is it, you know, what can I buy? What can I put in my garden? So wildlife boxes are quite an obvious one. It's also a good thing to put if perhaps you've not got much space. So things like bird boxes and bat boxes can go on brick walls if you're struggling for outside space. Could be a hedgehog box as well, and placement's important for that. So quiet, dark corners on the scrub, in hedges. Bird boxes need to be off the ground, out of the reach of cats. In terms of aspects as well, you do want to. It's always better if you can like offer a variety as well. Do you know which aspect they prefer? Birds generally, is it a species dependent kind of thing?
Not south facing. Is
Yeah.
a general thing. Not south facing, not north facing. You want it to get some sun, probably kind of southeast to eastish, because you want it to be warm, but too south and it will cook, and north it would just be too cold.
I learned recently that some species are actually really picky, won't live higher than 6 foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of things like robins and stuff
Yeah,
are
very
really low, really low to the
I
ground.
was surprised actually at how low.
Yeah, so you know the only reason they say 1.5 meters is just because it's slightly more out the reach of cats, but like a lot of the species, you know, usually be in hedges and stuff, which are often not really much taller than 1.5 meters or 2 meters. And it's often it's with bird boxes, it's better to place them kind of in foliage, so they need a clear flight path. But if you've got a tree with loads of ivy, you can kind of tuck it in. That's great. So they've got a bit more shelter around it as well. And also making sure that the bird boxes are decent, because the last thing you want is to spend money, put one up, and then it disintegrates within 2 years. So you can get ones, I think there's some with like 100-year sort of guarantees on them. And so you get treated wood or woodcrete, which is a mixture of concrete and wood. So it's kind of recycled wood. And they're really sturdy. And it's things like making sure, if you can, the holes, woodpeckers and blue tits will often go in and peck them out and make them bigger. So you can get a lot with sort of metal kind of caps around the edge to stop stuff getting in and making them wider and moving in.
I've seen squirrels do it as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, squirrels are really bad. Yeah.
So bat boxes as well. And again, Like he says there, sunny sided trees, but variations important. I know Leo's going to do a talk on bats later in the year, and we did one last year. And he was talking about, it depends what they're being used for. So a hibernation roost will be different from a maternity roost, and they require different conditions for that. So a variety of different places for bat boxes is what you're looking for really there. Species dependent as well. Some of the bat boxes you can get, tens of bats in them. Some of them it'll just be for a solitary bat. Some you'll have roosts that are very, very sizable. Obviously, it can't be that big if it's only a small bat box. Okay, and the vertebrate boxes, they should be placed on south-facing walls.
That's good to know, but I've seen a lot of them placed wrong then.
South facing's best because it's warmest.
I think people just forget to think about the fact that they can't produce their own heat.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. So, as warm as you can, south facing walls best. And height matters slightly less. But equally, getting something up is better a lot of the time.
Okay, here we go. So cleaning wildlife boxes. Should be cleaned once a year in autumn. Sorry, bird boxes once a year in late autumn. Hedgehog boxes in mid-spring. And you're basically just checking there that they're not being used. So bird boxes, all your fledglings will have gone. Hedgehogs will have stopped hibernating. What does that say there? Many invertebrate boxes will have parts that are replicable once they've been used. I don't know what it means.
Replaceable.
Replaceable. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of invert boxes will have, removable bamboo tubes that you'll just sort of replace. Kind of, I don't know, mid-springish probably. You want to sort of avoid the point where they're coming in and laying eggs. Probably late summer to early autumn is probably better, actually, because you want to avoid either larvae or adults hibernating over winter and then them setting up nests. So you're probably looking at everything kind of leaving sort of late summer, I think. But it's basically every year at some point remove the ones that have been used and put in new ones. And if you're worried, if you're worried about them having stuff in it, you can always put it to the side and then just kind of leave it and then throw them away after 6 months or something. But there's a lot of parasites that live in solitary bee nests, so if you're not clearing them out, it just becomes this kind of haven for parasites. Yeah.
Last thing you want to do is try to be doing good, but inadvertently create a nasty cycle.
Yeah, it's the same with the bird boxes and hedgehog boxes as well. So hedgehogs are obviously we've got fleas and all sorts, and then birds, but there's a lot of diseases going around with birds. So if you're not cleaning it out, it's just you're not helping.
Yeah. Like it says there, yeah. So clean your boxes, rinse with boiling water, and let them dry before replacing or putting them back together. In terms of hedgehogs boxes, you can add straw, but they'll have their own bedding too. But we've kind of covered that with what you said there, haven't we? In terms of they need cleaning to just help them out. And bat boxes you don't need to clean. First of all, because if you have a bat there, you'll be committing a wildlife crime. So you need a licensed ecologist to come check it. But they don't need doing it. Especially if you buy the Kent ones, the Kent style ones that they're open at the bottom. Yeah. The what falls straight out.
Yeah, so the one on the previous slide was a Kent bat box. So the ones that are kind of they have a solid bottom, they do need cleaning, but equally, if there might be a bat in there, you shouldn't be going and cleaning it anyway. But yeah, the Kent style ones are better because it's a flat base, and then you've got slats in the middle, and they fly up into it, and so you're not ever going to get a massive accumulation of guano or anything because it'll just fall out the bottom.
You've got to be careful because you're not even meant to use flashlights to check, are you?
No,
Like,
licensed
if
ecologist.
you've got a license, it's the no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of managing wildflower and grasslands,
So the problem is with establishing meadows in sort of areas that have been grassland prior as your nutrient levels. Not just nitrogen, but phosphate. Nitrogen leaves the soil pretty quickly. Phosphate will stick around for a lot longer. So it can be quite difficult to get back to the kind of lovely pastoral meadows that you'd see in sort of some really nice areas. But you can increase your diversity. You know, there are wildflowers that will still be okay with high nutrient levels. Essentially, the higher the nutrient level, the more competitive it makes your grasses that you're going to get. So there's a couple of grass species that do really, really well in high nutrient grasslands and meadows. And the more nutrients they give you, the more robust and stronger they'll get. And they'll just swamp everything else out. Whereas as you lower those nutrients, those grasses just either won't grow or be a lot less competitive. And a lot of our wildflowers have evolved to take advantage of areas where there isn't really any nutrients available at all, and they do a lot better in those situations, and it encourages more competition basically to get our diversity.
I'm always amazed by some of our alpine species can live pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So there's loads of that kind of stuff. But there's certain things, you know, it's about how you mow and what you put in there and the attention that you're paying to it. And you can definitely, you know, it's not a case of, oh, well, you've got a playground, therefore you will never get anything there. It's you've got a playground, you're going to need to do some more work to increase how many species you're getting. And there's a few things you can do. So you can scarify the soil. So you can buy scarifiers if you're feeling flush, or you can just go over with a rake. And you just want to create bare ground to allow those wildflower seeds to take root and germinate. So a lot of them need to be, you know, having contact with the ground to germinate. If you just throw them and they land on the grass, they won't germinate. So yeah, just go through with a rake and just you're aiming for kind of 50% bare ground-ish. And you do that before you sow. It's also worth doing it every few years anyway, even if you're not necessarily actually sowing anything in there, going through with a rake in sort of, you know, late summer, autumn, and just open up the thatch and just make space for stuff to come through and germinate is really good. And then mowing regime. Traditional meadows are mown once, twice, sometimes 3 times a year. Well, they weren't mown, they were grazed. So meadows exist to feed livestock a lot of the time. They were, you know, grazed in different intensities, but often the best thing to do for a wildflower meadow is mow it sort of mid to late spring. So what you want to do is you want to get the grass, put all its energy into growing, and then take off all that growth to allow light and air to get to the potentially germinating seeds, and it just removes the vigor in that grass a bit early on in the year.
Is that why a lot of kind of land management projects are now doing kind of like heritage grazing?
Yeah, it's great. So you'd put, which order is it? The cows on first, because they kind of cut above the soil level. And then you put sheep and goats on because they'll pull stuff up and they'll get in with their hooves and they'll kind of make that bare ground and patches. And you know, previously it would have probably been grazed all year, but with less intensity. So you get that kind of mosaic-y sort of structure to it. And the easiest way to replicate that is have late spring mow and then a sort of late summer, early autumn mow. The most important thing you have to do is take your cuttings off. If you're not taking your cuttings off, you're not taking that nutrients. You're not taking those nutrients away from the area. All you're doing is just composting it back into the ground. So if you want a lovely lush lawn, fine. But if you want to start weakening the really strong grasses, you need to cut and collect. You can also do things like planting yellow rattle, which weakly parasitizes grass, so you can kind of weaken some of the grass species, although it's only an annual, so it will grow and flower and die off in 1 year. So you might need to keep sowing it, because often, unless you're really like closely managing it, it needs quite a lot of open ground to germinate and, you know, that kind of thing. But it's a good one to weaken a bit of the grass.
I've never seen much of it, but up at
That's beautiful.
Cabin Hill was like tons
Yeah,
of stuff.
it
Yeah,
was really,
loads of it
well.
there.
We did this in Chiller Woods,
Did you?
Chiller Fields last year,
Yeah,
or the year before, last year.
yeah. There's a lot.
For exactly this purpose,
Yeah.
to weaken the grass.
That's mine. It's another parasite. There's a few grass parasites that you can put in just to weaken everything. The other thing you can do is get in with a digger and strip the soil. I mean, it's not wildlife gardening, but if you're managing sort of more amenity spaces for plants, the best thing you can do is run an excavator and take topsoil. Or get an inverter and flip the soil over about 1 metre deep and expose that really nutrient poor soil. But that's obviously slightly more ambitious than going into your garden.
What have they done here? They just mown it and collected it because it's like the wild
Whereabouts?
in the park. It just seems quite, you know.
I don't know.
It's-
It's in September, so I'm
No,
thinking summer.
I didn't really notice when they did it, but it just seems quite. It looks bad, as in good for like this year's
Mhm.
wildflowers. Really, it looks quite open and, you know, thatchless.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. They've either inverted it, or you get a big digger and it flips the soil over, and you get the nutrient layer. You get the poor nutrient soil comes up from the bottom, or you get in with an excavator and strip the topsoil. But then you've got to find somewhere to be topsoil
Pay for it.
and get the money to do that. So, yeah, depends how ambitious you want to get, really.
okay, so this is Paul, who's kind of my counterpart, the other assistant ecologist. This is his garden, and this is just a bit of a case study of what he's done in his garden. So this was it when he moved in. So I'm not sure we've got like a complete after picture, but he has done quite a lot of work there. So different things he's done are he's got a wildflower border, so things like red campion, creeping thistle, oxeye daisy. Obviously not in flower there, but you can see that there's what we've been talking about. There's a bit of bare ground in between those plants there. And just, not all the grass, especially if if you have young children, it's difficult to just have total wildflowers, and most people don't want that, but an area is always good to go for. He's also got a small pond in the border that looks like it's freshly gone in there. But what Paul's actually done is he's got 2 ponds. So he's got a small pond. He's also got a bigger pond as well. But that could be just providing a bit of a drink for some wildlife.
Realised until last year how much bees rely on.
Yeah.
We have a hive. I know they're not gold, they're not native. I think they're Italian as well. We have honeybees as part of our community growing space. And we put a small pond in and they queue to drink at this pond. It's very orderly and polite. But yeah, no, you don't appreciate that insects need it just as much as anything else.
Yeah. We've also got some longer grass left there. I remember not long after we started, Paul said to me, "Where do I get some ragwort from?" I don't think I gave him. I said, "But we've got tons in our garden. We're next to. I live next to turf fields. And I don't know what they chemically spray it, but we get all the ragwort in our garden, so it's it's absolutely everywhere. But I've never really heard of someone putting it in the garden. And I've got quite defensive over ragwort kind of recently.
It's
as well.
great.
Yeah.
Unless you've got, well, no, unless you're making hay for
Yeah.
your grass, it makes no difference.
No.
The horses won't eat it if they can see it.
Yeah.
That's the only time it becomes a problem is if you're cutting it for hay and for silage, and that's the only time it's a problem. And
Yeah.
other than that, it's fine.
So, speak of the devil, we've got a hoverfly in the red water there. I'm not sure if you get that picture, but we had hundreds of cinnabar moth caterpillars in our garden, just kind of munching away as well, which is lovely to see. Yeah, I think the hoverflies as well, moths, they're all providing that service of pollination as well. Is that gypsy? What is it? Yeah. Tell me what else there, yeah. So like I mentioned before, he's got a large pond there, and he's got diving beetles, frogs, pond snails, dragonfly, snugs, birds, and various insect larvae there as well. So, a lot of wildlife's been attracted by that water there.
It's a hell of a difference very quickly.
Yeah.
Notice that. I mean, we got the new species of not just invertebrate, which you would expect pretty quickly, but even different birds coming in as soon as they knew, and it was pretty well established.
It's so important.
I think it's you notice kind of any change you make, you notice the difference. Like no more May last year, where we live, there's 6 houses and then these turf fields all around us. We kind of a bit of a little, I wouldn't call it an oasis, but we're quite separate from a lot of other gardens, so we don't get much coming in like little birds. We don't get many. We have robins, wrens, but with no more May and all the dandelion seeds, we had loads of goldfinch, which I've never seen before, and it was just that one change brings that extra thing in. And Paul's got a bug hotel as well there in a warm spot, like we're talking about, with sultry bees, spiders, earwigs, and also some bare ground that he's left, where he's got some speckled wood butterflies as well.
The bare ground's great if you can create it as well, because often you get butterflies taking the salt off the top of the bare ground. A lot of inverts will kind of hibernate in that kind of rubble pile, not quite rubble pile, but kind of that kind of thing. Solitary bees that use bare grounds. It's if you can have a sort of open space, it's great for invertebrates.
More advice. There's a few these are slightly less. What am I trying to say here? So the Wildlife Trust, we're looking at wildlife there. Some of these other ones are perhaps a bit more gardeny in terms of their influences. So the RHS, Natural History Museum. Sorry, the RHS is a bit more kind of formal kind of gardening approach. But the RSPB, Natural History Museum, BBC Wildlife Magazine, and also we had the other links earlier, didn't we?